Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Just waiting for a few more people to join us. Quite a lot of people have booked into this webinar, and it's just gone 12 o'clock. So just bear with me a minute or so, and we will get going as soon as possible.
And hello, thanks for coming. I hope that the next hour is going to be really insightful for everyone. Lovely to see some familiar faces joining and some unfamiliar faces, so thank you.
Okay. Karen, will we kick off?
We shall kick off, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, look, welcome everyone. My name is Gerard O'Neill. I'm chairman of Amárach Research. It's wonderful to be here today, this afternoon, to share with you some fascinating research, very timely research, which I hope will guide you in terms of your own planning and thinking about AI in terms of your business development and, of course, your customers. I'm especially delighted that this is a joint webinar with Karen Howley. And Karen will introduce herself. She is an AI guru with considerable experience in companies like Accenture, RTE, SSE, Electricity, and others. I've been running Amárach for a while, as many of you know, and in my little world, it's really important to be on top of trends and to be looking forward and ahead to what opportunities might lie in the future. So we're just delighted to have this chance to partner with Karen and to provide what I believe will be very interesting and very timely research and content today. Just a little bit about Amárach. Well, as the name suggests, our core proposition really is about looking ahead to the changes that matter for our clients as they affect their customers in turn. We invest in understanding what's going on in the lives of consumers and business leaders and key stakeholders to hone our insights and guide our foresight. A lot of what my team do is really use all the tools of market research to develop an understanding of change as it's affecting customers and work out what that might mean in terms of strategy for our clients. We've been on an AI journey ourselves in Amárach for the past 2 years. ChatGPT went live back in October, November 2022, and we've been embracing that since. And our investment in the research we're sharing with Karen and you today is just one of the resources guiding us as we move towards an AI-first future as a market research and insight agency.
And so just a little bit about me as well. So I do 3 things. The first is that I train people in generative AI tools like ChatGPT and Copilot. And I actually have a 1-day masterclass on the 10th of July that's coming up with the Marketing Institute of Ireland. So if you are interested in learning how to write better prompts, how to customize ChatGPT, how to build your own AI assistants, please do check that out. The second thing that I do is I work with businesses on transformation, and really what AI presents is that opportunity to transform how you do work today, as well as transform what it is that you do, right? And so I work with businesses to do bespoke capability building programs and team coaching that can include workflow mapping and design and culture workshops. So what does it mean to be AI first as a culture, as an organization? And then the third thing I do is strategy. So that can be like strategy workshops, use case prioritization, business case development, road mapping. I think especially like as we see this year, like especially some of the big players, the big tech players like Adobe, Google, Microsoft, and Salesforce, they're all pushing now their AI features, AI products that come at a premium price tag. And I think businesses need to understand, well, what is the business case here? Why should I prioritize it? What is the investment? And oftentimes you do need some outside in support to help you move a bit faster on that. So I do work with organizations in that way too.
Thanks, Karen. And indeed, as Karen has made clear, she brings to this conversation really practical advice and insights. And I think you'll see that in the report we'll be sharing with you later on as well. So what we're going to do this afternoon in this brief session, an overview of the readiness gap, the AI readiness gap, as we called it. We're going to look at just how people are using AI, consumers and the general public. There's a lot of people playing with it, experimenting with it. The impact, of course, that AI is having on workplace productivity, and there's some really interesting insights from the research about how employees are embracing or not embracing AI and the things that they are doing with it. The barriers, of course, to broadening AI adoption, especially in the workplace, and a couple of, a nice case study, how Karen increased her productivity by 1/3 using AI to write this report. And then building on all of that, what should you do to build your AI capability and have a real impact on productivity? As I said, very hands-on, very applied, very practical. And steps generally for Ireland. We as marketers, many of you are marketing professionals, but business people, leaders, how do we go about closing the Ireland AI readiness gap? And we'll have time at the end for a Q&A session. So over to Karen.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. So what we're going to do is I'm going to whistle through 7 key insights and 3 very opinionated hot takes on what I think all of this research means for marketers and agencies. So insight number 1, nearly half of Irish adults are using AI tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, and Gemini, right? And so when I first saw this research, right, what we have is there's actually 7% of Irish adults not using AI and 43% of us who are. And as someone who's been an early adopter of the technology for 2.5 years, this figure initially really surprised me. I was because you can live in a bubble. When you're on LinkedIn and 1/3 of your network is pronouncing themselves as AI specialists or upskilling in AI in some way, shape, or form, you can live in a bubble. And so I think research like this is really important actually to get you out of your bubble and to see what's actually going on. And this research is compiled from 2 surveys that we did. One was in April and one was in May. And we asked this question in both sets. Now, in April, what we found was that 62% hadn't used AI. And so in May, that decreased by 5 points to 57%. So we know that adoption is accelerating. And perhaps if we were to do this survey again today, that gap might have closed a little more. But the fact still remains that over half of the Irish adult population isn't using AI, and the biggest thing that's stopping them is a lack of understanding or a sense of need for it. And if I can even bring in a bit of an anecdote from my own life. So my sister, who is younger than I am and runs a coffee shop and bakery, she looks after a lot of operational things in her business, from creating employee rosters to managing her social media. And when I asked her if she was using AI for either work or personal use, her answer mirrored a lot of what we heard in the responses or so, which is, sure, what would I need to use AI for, right? And so to me, this signals a systemic education problem amongst our business community and not necessarily one that gets solved at a family dinner. So next question, what is stopping people from using it? And this here is really around perception-based hurdles that are getting in the way of broader adoption. So different groups have different barriers, right? So if you look here at the navy shows AI users and the light blue shows people who haven't used AI either for work or personal use. And of those who haven't started yet, you can see that actually the biggest barrier, 35% say that there's no need or it's irrelevant to their current life. Whereas interestingly, one of the bigger barriers for those who are using AI, something that's stopping them from using it more, is a lack of trust and privacy concerns, right? And accuracy and reliability concerns also come to the fore. So it really depends, if you're already using AI, the barriers are different to, say, using it more than for those who haven't started their journey yet. Insight 3. Now, I think this one is really interesting. Age matters. The younger you are, the more likely it is that you are using it. So let's take a look at this chart. So it just paints such a clear picture to me, right? It clearly shows that young adults are leading the way when it comes to AI adoption. Now, in the open-ended questions that we asked, what really came through for this younger demographic is how they're using it to help with coursework and research. And when I say research, I'm talking about the type of research that you do that brands want to be associated with. Help me plan my holiday, come up with a recipe, right? So I'm going to share more on that shortly. And then we can see that like 2/3 of those aged 25 to 34 are using it. And this is representative of perhaps a younger workforce. Now, in contrast, that older workforce look like they might be starting to be left behind. And that's from two perspectives. The first is that they're not using AI for personal use. They're not using it, to help them make consumer decisions or product research, for example, not yet, right? And the second is that while their younger colleagues may perhaps be pushing ahead with AI adoption, they are slower to adopt it, which starts to build a bit of a generational capability gap. Which is not too dissimilar to what we saw, with when digital technologies first came into the workplace. I would have been described at the time as a digital native myself, right? So next, insight 4, when you use AI, you become curious. When you don't, you remain worried, right? So we asked people how they felt about AI, right? And emotion shapes adoption. So what's really interesting here is that half of those who are using AI say that they feel curious about it, while 44% who haven't started yet are worried, right? Now, these are some really contrasting feelings, and they can both actually be true at the same time, okay? Because it's not that like you're using AI and you're not worried. And I actually think that's perfectly understandable. So even today, we hear in the news that Amazon is set to cut their staff because AI is improving productivity so much. And the roles most at risk here, ironically, are development roles, the skills that actually have accelerated the development of the technology. So I do think it's that these feelings can coexist, whether you are using AI or whether you haven't started yet. But if you want to increase adoption, especially in the workplace, that does mean addressing fears and concerns around AI and starting to hone in on like, how can you be curious? How can you start to experiment more and build that into your culture? So a few more feelings on it. So most people aren't indifferent; they're uneasy and unsure. So as I've said, like, we have people here. These are strong emotions: worried, fearful, terrified, right? And even to pull out one thing that came out in the research was sentiments like this: "I'm afraid of it taking over the world," and so these feelings are real. And if we're looking to drive change, we need to be cognizant of that. And I think from a consumer lens, one thing that I would take from this is be careful how you use AI. You might turn some consumers off. And from a work lens, if you're driving adoption in the workplace, be aware of these feelings around AI. People's feelings are real. You need to listen to them, and that requires more than sending out a simple mandate to use AI. It means creating a forum where safe discussions about the role of AI in the workplace can happen. Insight 5. So the age of the personal AI planning assistant is here, and it is changing the purchase journey, even though it is in early kind of stages. So what we found was that among those who are using AI, Irish adults in Ireland, the biggest use is actually personal use. So 83% are saying that they're using it for personal use, compared with 54% who are saying they're using it for work. And this is likely skewed by the fact that many in that 18 to 24-year age group haven't yet entered the workforce and are actually the biggest adopters of AI currently. I think it's also interesting to pull out that 30% of those who use AI for personal use are using it to research and plan. And that's like research to help them make consumer decisions. So some things that we love to use a personal AI planning assistant for, we love to use it to plan travel itineraries, compare energy providers, visualize kitchen renovations. This was really interesting to me. Like we had people saying that, like had a number of responses saying about like redesigning rooms and things like that using AI. Creating meal plans, so recipes and things like that. Or if someone had, like this here, I'm a new diabetic and I used it to plan meals and manage my schedule. We actually did see this coming through in those open-ended questions. People with very specific diets or needed to like change a health routine for some reason were going to AI to help them with that. Clarifying instructions for crafts or home products, right, or home projects. And then, I think as well, when I was reading through this, I had to reflect on how am I using AI as a personal planning assistant. And I thought I'd share a couple of the ways that I've used it recently. So I'm sure some people on this call have went to Bloom in the Phoenix Park a few weeks ago. So I brought my mum to Bloom, but my mum was coming up from Sligo and she needed to make a decision around, will I come up the night before? Will I come up the day of? And, depending on when she came up, depended on what we got to see and experience at Bloom. So I created 3 different itineraries for her using AI and shared them with her to make that decision making really, really easy. And she loved it. I planned a trip to Vietnam. It recommended a list of books for me based on what I've enjoyed reading over the last year. And I have to say, the recommendations are brilliant. I am currently on my 3rd book in less than 2 weeks. It helped me plan my meals and come up with recipes based on like different needs. It also saved me from burning my caramel sauce. So, I probably am not the best cook, but I was making caramel treats for my niece and nephew, and the sauce started to look funny. I took a photo of it. I used the O3 reasoning model in ChatGPT because it's quite good at reading images, and it problem solved it for me. It actually saved it and got it back to life into an edible form. And so, like, there's so many ways that we can use AI as a personal planning assistant, and we are definitely starting to see that come through. And then the other way that we're starting to see it come through, and this came through in the verbatims as well, is, choosing between like different services or providers. So I actually used it, I changed to energy provider recently, and I used it to give me a very clear breakdown of like the unit price for gas and electricity and the comparison on the different plans. And I was getting frustrated going into other kind of switching websites because I just couldn't see this exact breakdown, but it was able to give it to me and it was accurate. And so, this is really, I think, going to change how we research and how we make product purchase decisions. So we can, I think it is interesting to see this starting to come through. So this, if we're kind of comfortable with starting like, researching consumer things like food and that, what else are we comfortable or uncomfortable using AI for? This was a question that we asked people in the survey. So learning, planning meals and recipes and funny content, they are what we're most comfortable with. And what we also found was like of those using AI, most use cases scored under 50% of overall comfort. But like, as I said, learning, planning meals and recipes and funny content were like the highest. AI, people who are using AI are more than twice as likely to feel comfortable using it than those who aren't. So that to me says that it's not actually fear, it's unfamiliarity. And it changes once you start, and that is again like where that curiosity piece comes into play. Our comfort levels do change, and even in say areas like say providing financial advice, like people who are using AI today, it's actually 28% of people, nearly a third, who are actually comfortable with using it like that. That's not insignificant, and that's only going to grow. So I do think it's quite interesting to see what we're comfortable using AI with at the moment. Now, what I'm gonna change gear or focus a little bit, and I'm going to move into AI in the workplace, right? And again, this I want to remind people that our research surveyed Irish adults who represent the national population, right? And so this insight here that only a third of the Irish workforce are using AI. Something that I want to bear in mind is that if we were to do a version of this that looks at big tech, big enterprises, I actually think that that's going to be much, much higher, which in and of itself probably shows another gap between like big tech and how fast they can move ahead versus say small and medium-sized enterprises, which make up the backbone of the Irish economy. So I just wanted to make that point before I go into what the data says. So just a third, 34% use it for work purposes. I would expect that marketing teams and larger enterprises, as I said, likely index higher because strategic importance is being put on that are those functions to drive efficiencies. Now, AI is starting to begin to deliver meaningful value in Irish workplaces, but like I do think that that's unevenly distributed. A small share of workers are getting faster, more productive, and then others, like, half of people haven't even started yet, right? Or there's 17% in this bucket here who are using it for personal use, but it hasn't entered their work life yet. And so I do think that, like, not every job is going to change, but some roles are hands-on by nature. But I do see that there's a gap here in terms of like adoption and how AI can support business productivity across Ireland. So insight 7, productivity in the workplace follows habit and training. So I'm going to launch a poll here for a moment. Just bear with me. Okay. Okay, hopefully that has, oh no, I've not hit launch. There we go. Hit the wrong button. How effective has AI been in helping you be more productive at work? So, we have extremely effective there. What I would say is think of that maybe as, if it's extremely effective, are you saving between 8 and 12 hours a week? Is it significantly improving how you work? Quite effective. Have you noticed some clear time or efficiency gains? Maybe that's 4 to 8 hours a week. Somewhat effective. Minor improvements, nothing major, maybe a couple of hours a week. Not very effective. It hasn't made a real difference yet. Not at all effective. And maybe there's actually some instances where people are feeling that it slows you down or it's adding complexity. So if you could take a moment to do that, and I'll just wait and I'll take a look at the results. Okay, so view results. So what I'm seeing here is that 42% are saying that it's quite effective, notice clear time or efficiency gains, 25% extremely effective, so it significantly improves how you work, so great if you're getting those 8 to 12 hour savings, and somewhat effective, 28%. So minor improvements, but nothing major, and 6% of people are saying that it's not very effective. And that's not too dissimilar to what we saw in like in the overall population, right? I would say that double the people on this call are saying that it's extremely effective in terms of improving how you work. So what we found was that only 12% of workers using AI reported as extremely effective in boosting their productivity. And what was most interesting as well was like just what corresponded with like people who say that it's extremely effective. So I'm going to run another poll in a moment. But I think like one of the key things here for us is that actually being really productive is actually, and finding it extremely effective, is about identifying what you can use it for. And it's also about building a habit and building competency, right? So I'm just going to launch my second poll, which is to see how often do you use AI tools like Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini? Okay, I'm going to take a look at the results. So we have half people using it every day, frequently 20% people. So, well, 18%. Sorry, these numbers are changing. I should give it a minute. We have 55% of people saying that they're using it every day, and then a few times a week, 20% of people, occasionally once a week, 14% of people, right? So what we found was that those who use AI every day are 7 times more likely to rate it as extremely effective than those who use it occasionally. So what we have here is like 41% of people who use it every day, versus 6% of people who use it once a week. And even if I see in the poll that we just ran there, like 17% of people on this call are using it once a week. And so there is likely like many more productivity gains to be had from that, right? But what this points out is that the foundation of workplace AI capability is habit. It's not just knowing that a tool exists, but knowing when to use it. So how do you build a habit, right? I kind of feel that, we have to first of all look at some of these barriers to adoption. They need to be met with continuous education, but only 14% of the full-time workforce have actually had formal training. So if we look at like even the barriers to adoption of those who have used AI, 24% of people and who are in full-time employment, 24% of people say that it's lack of knowledge and understanding. 23% of people cite trust and privacy concerns, and 21% of people cite accuracy and reliability concerns. So if you want people using it more, then you have to address these things. And if I just pull out one thing there as an example of how to address it. So lack of trust and privacy concerns. So this is a chart that I created that showcases how the different LLMs use your data depending on the type of account you have. And it's no wonder that there are issues with trust and privacy concerns, because the thing is, like, how AI platforms use your data to train their models really differs depending on if you have a business account or if you have a consumer account. And so, like, even if we look at here on the business enterprise side of things, you'll see here a load of X's. those platforms are not training on your data. But on the consumer side of things, yes, unless like you opt out of training your data on ChatGPT, and on Copilot and on Perplexity, it is going to be used, right? I think of all of them, Gemini, which is Google's large language model, actually has the least amount of privacy controls available in the consumer version. And on Claude prides itself on privacy and kind of upholding the privacy as a core value. So it's the only one that does not actually train on your conversations unless you want to provide feedback to it. The others do, as I said, give some controls over there. But this is, again, like, people are confused because of this, right? And there might even be some, say, people who are using like a version, a business account in work, but then maybe they want to access, say, a different model for a different reason, and they go onto their consumer account. And how aware are they of like the privacy controls on those consumer accounts? Because I think that's happening. So that is where continuous education does need to come in. The other thing is that support and training make a measurable impact. So those who are using AI for work and received formal training or informal guidance were also more likely to say it helped them be more productive. So that's like a sizable 88% of both of these groups described AI as either extremely or quite effective, compared to 52% who've had no training. Now, we're going to move on to my 3 hot takes. Which is, the first one is, and please do appreciate my AI generated hot take pictures. One was created with ChatGPT and the other was created in Midjourney, just for fun. So AI in marketing isn't new, but using it effectively still is. So when we looked at what people are using AI for in those open-ended questions, the types of things that came up were surface level use cases. And surface level use cases get surface level results. So things like, I used it to create social media content and power presentations. It transcribed an hour-long meeting for me that would have taken ages. I used it to describe what I wanted it to do in Excel, and it gave me the formulas. It's kind of like run-of-the-mill stuff, right? They don't really match up to how the technology has continued to evolve in the last 2.5 years. So let's take a look at that in the moment, for a moment, right? So, you know, what we have here is like always evolving capabilities. Accuracy is improving, quality of writing is improving with the different models that are released. Privacy controls have changed, reasoning capabilities have really come into their own this year. And I would say that, like, for many people, they're still not choosing, they're not swapping, they don't know when to choose a reasoning model over, say, your standard model that is good for most tasks, right? Image generation has come on leaps and bounds, so is video and audio generation. Custom chatbots, again, like, I didn't see too many people, or like, to be honest, I think I saw 1 out of 1,000 responses saying that they built a custom GPT. Automation, like, is not something that's kind of widespread in terms of like personal productivity, but it is absolutely a feature that can be tapped into. In particular, if you're on Copilot, you have AI agents. If you are on ChatGPT, you have GPTs. If you're on Perplexity, you have spaces. I wish they could all have the same name, but they don't. And Claude is project, right? So the other thing that they have is workspace connectivity. So you can now connect, like, say, your SharePoint documents or your Google Drive documents straight into like different AI systems. And they also have memory. So they're kind of like personalizing your own experience within the AI tools. So, like, if these capabilities are always evolving. Like what you have access to today is likely different to what you had access to 3 or 6 months ago. And that trend does look set to continue. So you can't really strategize around how you're going to use AI in your day-to-day work unless you are kind of staying up to date with this, experimenting with these new features. And of course, unless you have access to the features, right? Because not everyone has access to those premium features. So I thought I'd share a little bit around how I increased my productivity by a third, so 5.5 days compared with 8 days to write the report. And I broke it out in terms of the different tasks, so data familiarization and validation of 4 different data sets, quantitative insight and extraction and charting, so there were 30 charts, review of verbatims into data sets, and drafting a 3,600 word main report. So what I did was I actually used a few different AI tools to estimate how long I spent, how long it would have taken me without AI to write the report. And so with O3, which is a reasoning model on ChatGPT, the result I got was 8, and that was after me probing it. I think it originally had said 12, but I pushed it. I was like, I think you might be over pushing that there. With Copilot, so this was using the normal, like good for everything tasks, large language model. It said 16.5 days. And I tried to interrogate that. I went back and I pushed it and I probed it and I gave it the same information I gave to the O3 reasoning model. And it still came back with 16.5 days, which, to be honest, I don't accept. And then I looked at Copilot Analyst, which is essentially an AI agent, a reasoning model that is in Copilot, and it came back with 12 days, which I thought was more realistic. But again, it highlights the point around, do you know when to use different models and what to use them for? And then my actual time spent when I used AI was 5.5 days. And just to give you some insight into the reasoning, I did get fully rationalized ideas for how long it would take in each area. So drafting the report, so outline narrative, weave in charts and quotes, business report writing benchmark, 300 to 800 words per hour. And then they used a midpoint of that, add 4 hours for structuring and layout. So it is quite thorough, and that was where I was able to interrogate it. But then again, I am naturally a critical thinker, so I don't accept the first answer I get, even if it is an easy route, or even if it is the sexiest headline, saved, whatever it was, 8 days compared to, that's not true. I don't accept that, right? So critical thinking is the most important skill to master in an AI-enabled workplace. So effective use of AI depends on robust critical thinking skills. I feel that marketers need to be comfortable questioning and refining AI outputs, understanding their limitations, and knowing when and how to challenge them or trust them. This capability transforms initial experimentation into reliable, high-impact results. So again, critical thinking is one of those essential skills that is going to get you over those like accuracy and trust barriers that we have seen come up as the main barriers for to like really driving adoption in the workplace. And I wanted to point out, there have been times where AI has decreased my productivity. And, just to bring to life a variety of instances that this has happened to me with, sometimes I share content that I've spent time working on, that might be, I have created a presentation, whatever it is, like the content that I have, or someone's interviewing me and I've shared some details about what I've created, and they put that into an AI tool with potentially a bad prompt, and I get back then the output, and they send it on to me without actually critically evaluating how well does these questions match up with the content that Karen has just shared with me. And what ends up happening is I get this back, I have to review it. They're chuffed because they've used AI, but actually they haven't used it well. And I see this is not aligned with what I shared. And, some examples of where this has happened is that, when people are interviewing me, like AI obviously is a technology. Now, I'm much more on workplace productivity. I don't develop AI tools, but some of the questions that will come back are developer questions. And this is just one example of where this happens to me, and it's happened a number of times. And I think that if this is happening to me, then I'd expect that it's happening to others too. So to me, this is a lack of critical thinking and judgment when using AI. That's adding to the work, and usually it's those who are in positions of oversight that maybe that feel this, right? Um, so it might make you feel like you're being productive, but the reality is you could be adding work onto someone else. So how do you mitigate this? Like when I was writing the report, I actually, used ChatGPT to evaluate it from the lens of Gerard. And I, took on board the feedback. Some things, not everything, but most things. And I continued to improve it. I continued to iterate it. And so when I finally got around to sending him the report, what's the response? Both are really good, Karen. There wasn't a whole load of red penning or, on it. And so I think that we have to be mindful as well that, like, if we're not using our critical thinking, we could be adding time on to someone else. So, last hot take. Oh no, sorry. I one more thing on critical thinking. So I asked ChatGPT how I used my critical thinking skills to write the report, and the response that I got was, "I don't know what matters until someone shows me." That's where critical thinking comes in. On this project, Karen didn't just accept what I gave her. She challenged it, spotted contradictions, asked sharper questions, and made sure the narrative held up under pressure. It was my curiosity, skepticism, of which I have a decent degree, and editorial judgment that pushed the work beyond the obvious, right? So I think that's just really important to note. Final hot take before we go to Q&A. We risk over-indexing on efficiencies at the cost of brand differentiation. So when I speak to business leaders about AI, the initial conversation typically revolves around efficiency. How can we do more with less? How can we reduce our agency spend? And often this focus is driven by external pressures beyond the marketing team, CFOs and CEOs looking at AI as a solution to cost challenges. Now, while that's understandable to prioritize efficiency, we also have to be mindful that if we of what we lose sight of, right, when efficiency becomes the only measure of success, because what we focus on grows. Focus solely on the problems and the problems grow. Focus exclusively on efficiencies and efficiencies grow, but at what cost? And so we're now 2.5 years into adopting generative AI, yet few conversations that I have today move beyond efficiency. Rarely do I hear, how can AI help us innovate or differentiate our offering? And so to genuinely differentiate, your team needs space and support to use AI creatively, to explore new capabilities that they previously didn't have access to. And, I want to be clear, differentiation in an AI first market does not mean more creative, it doesn't necessarily mean more creative brand work. It can show up in a few different ways. It can be investing in your people as a differentiator, putting a focus on emotional intelligence and critical thinking. It can be new campaign deliverables, apps, games, interactive content. All these things would have cost an awful lot and also taken a lot of time to develop in the past. But now AI is unbelievable at coding. Like it's, even for me, like I have mobile optimized my own website using like the coding capabilities of AI. In-person connection, I think this is going to be more important. If you want to differentiate and stand out, building brand activations that create meaningful in-person connections and human experiences that AI cannot replicate. And then finally, product innovation and customer experience. So adding features, services, or experiences that delight your customers. And some of those features might be AI enabled, right? So I kind of feel that, like, we can't strategize around AI based on what the technology could do last year. New models, new capabilities, new consumer behaviors are emerging constantly. So you need mechanisms in place, whether that's internal or through trusted partners like your agencies or consultants like me that can continually keep your teams informed and evaluate these opportunities. But I do think that for agencies, they can really play a role in helping you differentiate in these ways. So closing Ireland's readiness gap, moving from insight to action. So I think there's three kind of areas here that you can take action on. The first is get started with the right foundations, picking a platform, setting guardrails. If you haven't already started using it, or it's not formalized in your workplace, creating a clear, practical AI use policy and giving teams permission to explore responsibly. The second, which I think I've drilled home a lot, is build capability around critical thinking skills. And I think this also requires safe experimentation spaces, clear expectations, practical training, and critical thinking built into team culture. And the final one is treat AI adoption as transformation. So redesigning how the work gets done, modernizing workflows, and change management. These are all things that I think need to be brought into focus to close that readiness gap in our workplace. So on that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to get the discussion going.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. Really rich insight there. There's more in the report, which you'll all be getting within the next 24 hours or so. There's a Q&A there if you want to pop any questions into the Q&A, and I'll read them out. But one of the things that I'd like to ask you, Karen, is whether there's kind of a formula for AI success in the workplace that's emerging from this research, from your other experience. So, is it a matter of use it frequently, some training, abide by proper rules on privacy, or, if you were to kind of, at this stage in June 2025, say what is kind of a interim formula for AI success for the workforce that we could share with people participating today, what would that be?
I think, you have to look at it, right? If we're seeing that the biggest correlation is daily use and people finding it really, really impactful, that's because they've actually identified where it can help them, right? And so I actually feel that some team members and some teams need help understanding where it can be used, but then that also has to be matched with the capability to use it in that way, And so it is that combination of getting inspiration, understanding, asking that how might we question, how might we reduce the amount of time we spend on campaign planning with AI, and actually brainstorming that if that's your barrier, if you haven't been using it beyond, say, meeting transcriptions and things like that, I think that's something that teams can start to have more conversations around. And my experience as well, and there's been other research that indicates this too, is that people think that they're more proficient than they actually are. And so I totally understand that, because you have new features all the time, and so in order to remain proficient, you need time to experiment or access to some of those new features. So I think understanding which of those features might unlock most value for you is also critical for leaders to understand. And then, of course, there's a question around access to the tools. Let's be honest, all of these tools cost something, especially if you're using them in a meaningful way. I actually don't think if you're not on a paid subscription getting access to those paid features, I'd say that you might find it a frustrating experience and you wouldn't necessarily use it every day. So I do think that's also a barrier, any more than it didn't necessarily come up in our research. It said that there was that access to your subscription didn't really actually have an impact on how productive you felt you were. But to me, that signals even more that, you know, if you're not finding access to the capability to create custom chatbots, access to reasoning models, if you're not finding that that's boosting your productivity, then you perhaps don't know how to use that.
Thanks, Karen. Question from Kathy Cullen. How do you recommend building critical thinking into the workforce? So it's beyond AI with that question, but in your own experience, you've brought it up, and I think you're absolutely right. How do you build that into, particularly all of us in marketing, professional services firms, and so on?
Yeah. So I think critical thinking is also linked to a culture, right? And so for me, that is a bit of a cultural shift. I think that the way to build that in is to have critical thinkers in your workplace, or inject, like, say, I'm working with some organizations at the moment where I'm actually running essentially like an innovation lab with them so that they can like identify, right, what is it that we could use this for? But by bringing me in that capacity, they have access to critical thinking. Like, and I know that I'm a really good critical thinker. I've no problem in saying that. I think that the other way to build critical thinking is you have to be open to feedback. So, you know, critical thinking is also centered around getting multiple perspectives and not just the answer that you like. So, if you have a feedback culture in your organization, then I think that's a good thing. But I think that needs to be further developed. And, you know, in order to build that feedback culture, people need to be comfortable giving feedback and not necessarily getting, reacting to it in a negative way. Feedback has to be a positive thing. So one thing that I sometimes ask people, because if I ask people, oh, give me feedback on my talk, like all I'll hear is, oh, that was really good, that was really good, da, 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 da. And it's not what I want to hear. I want to know what's one thing that I can improve on for next time. And if you frame it like that, then people start to tell you. And so I feel like, you know, this is really like where critical thinking does start to blend with culture. That's not a technology thing.
Definitely. Okay. A question from Niall. This is kind of stepping outside the frame of the research we've shared, but obviously drawn on your experience. Have you seen any marked differences in attitudes or adoption between creative people and business people, the suits maybe, in terms of client services and marketing or agency environment? So the creative people versus the business people, in terms of client services. Is there any difference there or attitudinal difference?
I have actually. I suppose I was fortunate enough to do in-depth research, like where I spoke with 20 different employees as part of developing an AI strategy in a large organization. And so as part of that research, I was understanding how they felt about AI as well and what the sentiment was. And what came out was, yes, creative people were maybe a little more, I would say, fearful, anxious around it, and anxious around their jobs. And I think that's normal, right? Because, you know, even like in some organizations, the what we start to see is that AI is maybe being used to create certain types of content, right? But someone used to spend time creating that content, and so that person's role is changing. But their fear might be that actually, oh, what's this mean? And I also think, you know, where there's conflict, um, uh, conflict often arises out of like perceived importance, right? How important are you perceived to be? I don't know. Some people might be familiar with the SCARF model, but it's really interesting to look at the sources of conflict. And I feel that AI, when AI can now do certain creative tasks, that does start to bring to the fore people's feelings about like importance and the value that they can offer. And so I think there's a real, I think that people's roles are changing. I actually think that like gosh, like when everyone has access to creative tools, like I actually think that the quality of oversight of what they are spitting out is more important than ever. And again, this is where it's linked to critical thinking as well as existing skill sets. Any more than I can use I am not a designer. Like that I still think that a designer who is by trade in that space will still have better oversight than I will. And that is something to bear in mind. So, but yeah, I do think that for business people, maybe some of the more kind of admin type thing, that the focus is right, we need to get when you start using this, adopting it, driving efficiencies, they can see like, oh my God, I don't have to take those meeting notes anymore. That's amazing. It's really enjoyable
Mhm.
because then they go on to more strategic tasks. But I
Yeah.
do see a bit of a difference.
Another question here, just in relation to the question of using when someone uses search engine, they're getting AI prompts first. And I think this is back to this, what's it called? Generative
Engine
engine
optimization. Yeah.
optimization, Geo, which I only learned about a few weeks ago. So Geo is a feature now for a lot of marketers and indeed for a lot of PR and communications companies. So is that something you see happening more and more? Is that becoming more common?
Yeah, and listen, there's been lots of recent kind of research into how different shopping patterns and behaviors are emerging. And so I do think it's important to understand how large language models see your brand. If I can share one thing on it as well, it's that those large language models or AI systems, they love text. And so, like, as marketers, we might have been a fan of putting up the pop-up promo, things like that. They don't like that. And so we need to be mindful of that. Like we also need to be mindful of like those best practice SEO things that set around like our evergreen content, having like our structured data, clear headlines that answer different things. That's all really important still. I would also say that you know, this goes for like generative engine optimization. I actually think that, being these systems still like quality sources, okay? And so if your brand is on, say, a quality source, like a quality news source, getting PR, that's still massively important because all those backlinks still bring brand authority and that still applies. But it is different as well. So I do think that you need to seek out that support from your agencies and people who are well versed in that space.
Great, thank you. We're kind of coming close to the end. So just one more question there from Una Herlihy, talking about the young people at Gen Z becoming Gen AI, but there's a lot of anxiety about how AI will threaten people's careers, particularly young people starting out in the workforce. What's your point of view on that? Do you think that there's a justification for that anxiety? And keep it brief, Karen, please.
Um, for young people in the workplace, is it that they're more
Yeah,
anxious?
yeah.
Um, yeah, because because in order to like give because we learn on the job, right? But like if AI is providing a lot of the answers, then you're actually removing some of that opportunity to learn on the job, and the task becomes oversight. But you can only get that improved oversight capability with experience. So that's kind of a very high level on it.
Yeah, great. Look, there's more questions there. Unfortunately, we can't answer them all, and it's nearly lunchtime, and we do not want to delay that for you. So I'm going to just wrap it up here. There's a line that Karen used that really resonated with me: emotion shapes adoption. And the emotions that we are all experiencing, whether it's as business leaders, whether it's as employees, colleagues, family members, consumers, emotion shapes adoptions. And the two big emotions you might remember in the research were worry and curiosity. And that kind of maps to fear and hope. And I said this recently in a talk that fear puts up warning signs, hope puts up signposts. And we hope that the research that we've shared with you this afternoon will be a signpost that will give you hope about the way forward in your business, in your own personal lives, and in your career. It's only the first iteration of the work we've done. I've certainly enjoyed working with Karen, as you saw from my response to her email of the report she sent in the first iteration. So we hope that you'll stay in touch. We will let you know about further research that we're doing in future. And of course, we'll be sending you a copy of the report and a recording so that you can review it with your colleagues if you wish. So thank
Thanks
you
so
very
much,
much.
everyone.
Bye-bye.